Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good people. My name is Martini Moragewa Moreidi, and today I'm coming to you live, recorded, depending where you're watching this from. Um, tell you another story. Story comes from awesome gentleman Robert Greene from his amazing book, The Laws of Human Nature, and would recommend it if you get an opportunity to read this book. Man, grab a hold of it, good people. Anyway, today I'm telling you a story about Michael Eisner. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you get some lessons from it. By the summer of 1984, Michael Eisner, born 1942, president of Paramount Pictures, could no longer ignore the restlessness that had been plaguing him for months. He was impatient to move on to a bigger stage and shake the foundations of Hollywood. This restlessness had been the story of his life. He had begun his career at ABC and never settling too comfortably within one department. After 9 years of various promotions, he had risen to the position of head of primetime programming. But television began to seem small and constricting to him. He needed a larger, grander stage. In 1976, Barry Diller, a former boss at ABC and now chairman of Paramount Pictures, offered him the job of heading Paramount's film studio, and he jumped at the chance. Paramount had long been in the doldrums, but working with Diller, Eisner transformed it into the hottest studio in Hollywood with a string of remarkably successful films: Saturday Night Fever, Grease, Flashdance, The Terms of Endearment. Although Diller certainly played a part in this turnaround, Eisner saw himself as the main driving force behind the studio's success. After all, he had invented a surefire formula for creating profitable films. The formula depended on keeping costs down, and an obsession of his. To do so, a film had to begin with a great concept, one that was original, easy to summarize, and dramatic. Executives could hire the most expensive writers, directors, and actors for a film. But if the underlying concept was weak, all the money in the world would be wasted. Films with a strong concept, however, would market themselves. A studio could churn these relatively inexpensive films out in volume, and even if they were only moderate hits, they would ensure a steady flow of income. This thinking went against the grain of the blockbuster mentality of the 1970s, but who could argue with the undeniable profits Eisner had generated for Paramount? Eisner immortalized this formula in a memo that soon spread around Hollywood and became gospel. But after so many years of sharing the limelight with Diller at Paramount, trying to please corporate CEOs and pushing back against marketing directors and finance people, Eisner had had enough. If only he could run his own studio unfettered. With the formula he had created, with this relentless ambition, he could forge the greatest and most profitable entertainment empire in the world. He was tired of other people piggybacking on his ideas and success. Operating on top and alone, he could control the show and take all the credit. As Eisner contemplated this next critical move in his career that summer of '84, he finally settled upon the perfect target for his ambition: the Walt Disney Company. At first glance, this would seem a puzzling choice. Since the death of Walt Disney in 1966, the Walt Disney Film Studio seemed frozen in time, getting weirder with each passing year. The place operated more like a stodgy men's club. Many executives stopped working after lunch and spent their afternoons in card games, or would lounge about in the steam room on site. Hardly anyone was ever fired. The studio produced one animated film about every 4 years, and in 1983 produced a meager 3 live-action films. They had not had a single hit film since The Love Bug in 1968. The Disney lot in Burbank almost seemed like a ghost town. The actor Tom Hanks, who worked on the lot in 1983, described it as a Greyhound bus station in the 1950s. Given its dilapidated condition, however, this would be the perfect place for Eisner to work his magic. The studio and the corporation could only move up. Its board members were desperate to turn it around and avoid a hostile takeover. Eisner could dictate the terms of his leadership position, presenting himself to Roy Disney, Walt's nephew and largest shareholder of Disney stock, as the company's savior. He laid out a detailed and inspiring plan for a dramatic turnaround, greater than Paramount's, and Roy was won over. With Roy's blessing, the board approved the choice, and in September 1984, Eisner was named chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Frank Wells, the former head of Warner Brothers, was named president and chief operating officer. Wells would focus on the business side. In all matters, Eisner was the boss. Wells was there to help and serve him. Eisner wasted no time. He embarked on a major restructuring of the company, which led to the departure of over 1,000 employees. He started filling the executive ranks with Paramount people, most notably Jeff Katzenberg, born 1950, who had worked as Eisner's right-hand man at Paramount and was now named chairman of Walt Disney Studios. Katzenberg could be abrasive and downright rude, but no one in Hollywood was more efficient or worked harder. He simply got things done. Within months, Disney began to churn out a remarkable series of hits. Adhering to Eisner's formula, 15 of its first 17 films, such as Down and Out in Beverly Hills and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, generated profits, a run of success almost unheard of for any studio in Hollywood. One day, as Eisner explored the Burbank lot with Wells, they entered the Disney library and discovered hundreds of cartoons from the golden era that had never been shown. There on endless shelves was stored all of the great Disney classics animated hits. Eisner's eyes lit up at the sight of this treasure. He could reissue all of these cartoons and animated films on video. The home video market was in the midst of exploding, and it would be pure profit. Based on these cartoons, the company could create stores to market the various Disney characters. Disney was a virtual gold mine waiting to be exploited, and Eisner would make the most of this. Soon, the stores opened. The videos sold like crazy. The film hits kept pumping profits into the company, and Disney stock soared. It replaced Paramount as the hottest film studio in town. Wanting to cultivate a more public presence, Eisner decided to revive the old wonderful world of Disney. An hour-long television show from the 50s and 60s hosted by Walt Disney himself. This time, Eisner would be the host. He was not a natural in front of the camera, but he felt audiences would grow to like him. He could be comforting to children like Walt himself. In fact, he began to feel the two of them were somehow magically connected, as if he were more than just the head of the corporation, but rather the natural son and successor to Walt Disney himself. Despite all his success, however, the old restlessness returned. He needed a new venture, a bigger challenge, and soon he found it. The Walt Disney Company had plans to create a new theme park in Europe. The last one to open, Tokyo Disneyland in 1983, had been a success. Those in charge of theme parks had settled upon two potential sites for the new Disneyland. One near Barcelona, Spain, the other near Paris. Although the Barcelona site made more economic sense since the weather there was much better, Eisner chose the French site. This was going to be more than a theme park. This was going to be a cultural statement. He would hire the best architects in the world. Unlike the usual fiberglass castles at other theme parks, at Euro Disney, as it came to be known, the castles would be built out of pink stone and feature handcrafted stained glass windows with scenes from various fairy tales. It would be a place even snobby French elites would be excited to visit. Eisner loved architecture, and here he could be a modern-day Medici. As the years went by, the cost of Euro Disney mounted. Letting go of his usual obsession with the bottom line, Eisner felt that if he built it right, the crowds would come and the park would eventually pay for itself. But when it finally opened as planned in 1992, it quickly became clear that Eisner had not understood French tastes and vacation habits. The French were not so willing to wait in line for rides, particularly in bad weather. As in the other theme parks, no beer or wine was served on the premises, and that seemed like sacrilege to the French. The hotel rooms were too expensive for a family to stay there more than a night. And despite all the attention to detail, the pink stone castles still look like kitschy versions of the originals. Attendance was only half of what Eisner had anticipated. The debts Disney had incurred in the construction had ballooned, and the money coming in from the visitors could not even service the interest on them. It was shaping up to be a disaster, the first ever in his glorious career. As he finally came to terms with this reality, he decided that Frank Wells was to blame. It was his job to oversee the financial health of the project, and he had failed. Whereas before, Eisner had only had the best things to say about their working relationship. Now he often complained about his second in command and contemplated firing him. In the middle of this growing debacle, Eisner felt a new threat on the horizon: Jeffrey Katzenberg. He had once referred to Katzenberg as his golden retriever, so loyal and hardworking. It was Katzenberg who had overseen the string of early hits for the studio, including the biggest hits of all, Beauty and the Beast, the film that had initiated the renaissance of Disney's animation department. But something about Katzenberg was making him increasingly nervous. Perhaps it was the memo that Katzenberg had written in 1990, in which he had dissected the string of flops Disney had recently produced in live action. Since 1984, we have slowly drifted away from our original version of how to run a business, he wrote. Katzenberg criticized the studio's decision to go for bigger budget films like Dick Tracy, trying to make event movies. Disney had fallen for the blockbuster mentality and had lost its soul in the process. The memo made Eisner uncomfortable. Dick Tracy was Eisner's own pet project. Was Katzenberg indirectly criticizing his boss? When he thought about it, it seemed like this was a clear imitation of his own infamous memo at Paramount, in which he had advocated for less expensive, high-concept films. It now occurred to him that Katzenberg saw himself as the next Eisner. Maybe he was angling to take Eisner's job, to subtly undermine his authority. This began to eat away at him. Why was Katzenberg now cutting him out of story meetings? The animation department soon became the primary generator of profits for the studio, with new hits such as Aladdin and now The Lion King, which had been Katzenberg's babies. He had come up with the story idea and developed it from start to finish. Magazine articles now began to feature Katzenberg as if he was the creative genius behind Disney's resurgence in the genre. What about Roy Disney, the vice chairman of animation? What about Eisner himself, who was in charge of everything? To Eisner, Katzenberg was now playing the media, building himself up. An executive had reported to Eisner that Katzenberg was going around saying, "I'm the Walt Disney of today." Suspicion soon turned into hatred. Eisner could not stand to be around him. Then in March 1994, Frank Wells was killed in a helicopter accident while on a skiing trip. To reassure shareholders on Wall Street, Eisner soon announced that he would take over Wells's position as president. But suddenly, here was Katzenberg pestering him with phone calls and memos, reminding Eisner that he had promised him the president's job, if Wells ever left the company. How insensitive. So soon after the tragedy, he stopped returning Katzenberg's phone calls. Finally, in August 1994, Eisner fired Jeffrey Katzenberg, shocking almost everyone in Hollywood. He had fired the most successful studio executive in town. The Lion King had become one of the most profitable films in Hollywood history. It was Katzenberg who was behind Disney's acquisition of Miramax, considered a great coup with the ensuing success of Pulp Fiction. It seemed like madness on his part, but Eisner did not care. Finally freed of Katzenberg's shadow, he could relax and now take Disney to the next level, on his own and with no more distractions. To prove he had not lost his touch, he soon dazzled the entertainment world by engineering Disney's patches of ABC. The sheer audacity of this coup once again made him the center of attention. Now he was forging an entertainment empire beyond what anyone had attempted or imagined. This move, however, created a problem for him. The company had virtually doubled in size. It was too complex, too big for one man. Only 1 year earlier, he had undergone open heart surgery, and he could not handle all the added stress. He needed another Frank Wells, and his thoughts soon turned to his old friend, Michael Ovitz, one of the founders and the head of Creative Artists Agency. Ovitz was the greatest deal maker in Hollywood history, perhaps the most powerful man in town. Together, they could dominate the field. Many within the business warned him against this hire. Ovitz was not like Frank Wells. He was not a finance guy or a master of detail, as Ovitz himself would have admitted. Eisner ignored such advice. People were being too conventional in their thinking. He decided to lure Ovitz away from CAA with a very lucrative package and offer him the title of president. He assured Ovitz in several discussions that although Ovitz would be second in command, they would eventually run the company as co-leaders. In a phone call, Ovitz finally agreed to all the terms, but the moment Eisner hung up, he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. What had he been thinking? They might have been the closest of friends, but how would two such larger-than-life men ever be able to work together? Ovitz was power-hungry. This would be the Katzenberg problem ×2. It was too late, however. He had gotten the board's approval for the hire. His own reputation, his decision-making process as a CEO was at stake. He would have to make it work. He quickly decided upon a strategy. He would narrow Ovitz's responsibilities, keep a tight leash on him, and make him prove himself as president. By doing so, Ovitz could earn Eisner's trust and get more power. From day one, Eisner wanted to signal to Ovitz who was boss. Instead of moving him into Frank Wells's old office on the 6th floor at Disney headquarters, next to Eisner, Eisner put him in a rather unimpressive office on the 5th floor. Ovitz liked to spread money around with gifts and lavish parties to charm people. Eisner had his team monitor every penny that Ovitz spent on such things and watch his every move. Was Ovitz contacting other executives behind Eisner's back? He would not nurture another Katzenberg at his breast. Soon the following dynamic developed. Ovitz would approach him with some potential deal, and Eisner would not discourage him from exploring it. But once it came time to agree to the deal, Eisner would give a firm no. Slowly, word spread through the industry that Ovitz had lost his touch and could no longer close the deal. Ovitz began to panic. He wanted desperately to prove he had been worthy of the choice. He offered to move to New York to help manage ABC, since the merger of the two companies was not working out so smoothly. But Eisner said no. He told his lieutenants to keep their distance from Ovitz. He was not a man to be trusted. He was the son of a liquor salesman in the San Fernando Valley, and like his father, Ovitz was just a smooth salesman. He was addicted to attention from the media. Within the company, Ovitz became completely isolated. As months dragged on this saga, Ovitz could see what was happening. He had complained bitterly to Eisner. He had left his agency for Disney. He had staked his reputation on what he would do as president, and Eisner was destroying his reputation. Nobody respected him any longer in the business. Eisner's treatment of Ovitz was downright sadistic. In Eisner's mind, however, Ovitz had failed the test he had laid out. He had not proven himself to be patient. He was no Frank Wells. In December of 1996, after a mere 14 months on the job, Ovitz was fired, taking with him an enormous severance package. It was a dizzying and rapid fall from grace. Finally liberated from this great mistake, Eisner began to consolidate power within the company. ABC was not doing so well. He would have to intervene and take some control. He began to attend programming meetings. He talked of his golden days at ABC and of the great shows he had created there, such as Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days. ABC needed to go back to that earlier philosophy and create high-concept shows for the family. As the internet began to take off, Eisner had to get involved in a big way. He nixed the purchase of Yahoo pushed by his executives. Instead, Disney would start its own internet portal called Go. Over the years, he had learned the lesson. It was always best to design and run your own show. Disney would dominate the internet. He had proven himself a turnaround genius twice before, and with Disney now in a slump, he would do it a third time. Soon, however, a wave of disasters hit the corporation, one after another. After being fired, Katzenberg had sued Disney for the bonus, and based on performance, he was due under his contract. When he had been president, Ovitz had tried to settle the suit before it went to court and had gotten Katzenberg to agree to 90 million. But at the last minute, Eisner had nixed this, certain he did not owe Katzenberg anything. In 2001, the judge ruled in Katzenberg's favor, and they had to settle for a whopping $280 million. Disney had poured vast resources into the creation of Go, and it was a terrific flop that had to be shut down. The costs from Euro Disney were still bleeding the company. Disney had a partnership with Pixar, and together they had produced such hits as Toy Story. But now the CEO of Pixar, Steve Jobs, made it clear he would never work with Disney again, deeply resenting Eisner's micromanaging. ABC was underperforming. Most of the movies Disney produced were not just flops, but expensive flops, culminating in the biggest one of all, Pearl Harbor, which opened in May of 2001. Suddenly, it seemed that Roy Disney had lost faith in Eisner. The stock price was plummeting. He told Eisner it would be best for him to resign. What ingratitude! What hubris! He, Eisner, was the man who had single-handedly brought the company back from the dead. He had saved Roy from disaster and made him a fortune. Roy, who had been considered Walt's idiot nephew. And now, in Eisner's darkest hour, Roy was going to betray him? Eisner had never felt more enraged. He quickly struck back, forcing Roy to resign from his board. This only seemed to embolden Roy. He organized a shareholder revolt known as Save Disney. And in March of 2004, the shareholders voted a stinging rebuke of Eisner's leadership. Soon, the board decided to strip Eisner of his position as chairman of the board. The empire he had forged was falling apart. In September of 2005, with hardly an ally to lean on and feeling alone and betrayed, Eisner officially resigned from Disney. How had it all unraveled so quickly? They would come to miss him, he told friends, and he meant all of Hollywood. There would never be another like him. Thank you for watching, good people. That is the story of Michael Eisner. I hope you enjoyed it. If you get a chance, please read the book, read the story, and read about the interpretation that Mr. Robert Greene, he goes into the interpretation of the story, tells you about the background and how Eisner came to be the man he is and how he came to make the decisions he did. And he goes on to talk about how you could use the lessons, there's a man, Jim Rohn, says the two best teachers are your experience and OPE, other people's experience. So make sure to check out this book, good people, because other people's experience is way better than your own experience. You don't have to make the same mistakes that other people made. You can learn from other people. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy. Please share, like, share, subscribe. Wherever you're watching this from, say hi, comment, leave something. a comment, a GIF, share. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.